How did you find kind of the root?
I mean, honestly, I don't think I found really the heart of the story until I was done with the draft, until I had the whole story written, and then I could look back and be like, right, that this is where I was going the whole time. This is where I wanted to get. And having that realization, then I could go back into earlier parts of the book and kind of zhuzh up those spots to make them fit more with where I ended up going in the end. But I really, and the same thing with the book I'm working on now, I felt like I needed to write the whole thing before I really knew what was at the heart of the story.
Hello, and welcome to So I Wrote a Book, Now What? Where writers chat about writing. My guest today is Alexandria Faulkenbury. Her debut novel, Somewhere Past the End, comes out May 20th. It is stunning, truly beautiful, line-level writing, and just so engaging. It's available right now to request on NetGalley. So if you are a NetGalley reader, go request it. It's amazing. And we talk on this episode all about her unique journey to publication and everything involved in the writing process. I'm so excited for you to hear it. Let's get into it. Hi, Alex. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Nicole. Happy to be here.
So what made you decide to write a book?
Yeah, well, I have been, I think like a lot of writers, have always enjoyed writing ever since I was little and always wanted to write a book. And, somewhere along the line, you go to school and you get a job and you kind of put some of those things aside for a little while. But there was always a kind of a little voice in my head that still wanted to write stories. And probably it was my daughter when she went to school and I found myself with a little bit more time on my hands. That was when I thought, okay, well, maybe I can sit down and get some of this actually written. And so that was when I really started writing more short stories to start off with. But I always had this idea for a novel in the back of my mind, and eventually I got to that too.
Yeah. So is the novel that's going to be published in May, is that the first book that you ever wrote?
It is, yes. It's the
That's
first novel that
amazing.
I wrote. So I'm really excited that it'll be out in the world soon.
That's so exciting. So you started with short stories and then kind of moved to more longer form. When you moved into drafting something a little bit longer, did you outline it first or did you just sit down with your idea? How did it come about?
Right. Yeah. I am not a super big outliner. I have in more recent projects done sort of a bare bones outline, but I'm definitely more of a pantser. I don't know. I kind of like to learn what's going to happen as I write. I think it
Mhm.
keeps it, slightly more exciting and interesting, and I'm not sure where it's going to go. So, yeah, I usually will just sit down and start writing. And then after I've written a little bit, I will sometimes go back and kind of do a very, very skeletal, bare bones outline just to kind of help me envision where I want it to go. Because most of the time I don't start with an ending in mind. So.
And then the ending comes to you as you draft?
Yeah, I for this book I originally had a slightly different ending, and then the more that I revised it, I thought, I don't think that's really the right spot for us to end. So I eventually did change it. And that's kind of the downside, I guess, of if you're not a plotter, you end up doing a lot of reconfiguring and revision, but I don't personally mind that. I know that it's frustrating for some writers, but I kind of like
Yeah,
the puzzle piece fitting, so it doesn't really bother me.
totally. How many drafts would you say you go through then?
Oh goodness, I don't that is a good question. I should probably count sometime, but I don't think
Maybe
I
it's better not to.
yeah, it might be better not to. I don't know, a lot, definitely a lot. My husband is a historian, and when he writes, he's very meticulous. Like he'll get his sentence perfect before he moves on to the next sentence. And I'm definitely the complete opposite of that, and where I just basically just like spit everything out of my head onto the page and then go back and try to clean it up. So there's definitely a lot of drafts.
Yeah. Does your husband read your work?
He does, yes. He's always my first reader, and he always gives great feedback. And I will read his as well, although I'm not a historian, but can give a little bit of writing advice here and there, I guess.
Yeah. Is that hard to take feedback from somebody you're so close to?
Not with my husband, because I know that everything he's saying is, from a place of love and a place of wanting to help me make the story better. And he also, of course, says all the things he likes about it. So it's not just like, here are all the horrible things about this draft.
Right. So then once you have gone through your drafts, how did you know when it was done so that you could send it places? Did you have more readers beyond your husband?
I did. Yeah. I'm part of a writing group. And so I had, I guess, maybe like four folks from my writing group do an initial read through and give me their feedback. And then I had probably two or three more critique partner writing friends who read the next version and gave me feedback on that. And then so that was about 7 or 8 people, I guess, total, who read some draft of it. And when we got through all of those, I felt like, okay, it's at a pretty good spot to start sending it out.
Mm-hmm. And so then did you query?
I did, yes. I queried agents and editors. I don't have an agent. So the agent, I had a couple of close calls, but nothing worked out. And I had also sent it out to some smaller presses. And I was at the point right about where I was going to say, okay, I think that this isn't going to go anywhere. I'm going to put it on the shelf and I was already working on another manuscript. So I was like, I'll just focus all my
Mm-hmm.
attention on that one. And then I got the call from Apprentice House, my publisher, saying that they were interested in it. So it was kind of like the last hurrah, and it worked out.
That's so great.
Yeah, I was thrilled.
Yeah. Um, that's amazing and wonderful and so nice to hear as a querying author.
Yes, I was happy about it. And I will say too, and I shared this with on in a panel I did recently, but I had a really close call right at the beginning of my querying journey with an editor. I had done a pitch contest, and there was an editor at a much bigger press who was interested. And they were looking for a little bit more changes than I wanted to make. Not
Mm,
just like editing, but they wanted the story to go in a different direction
I
than I really
see.
wanted it to. Kind of almost a genre change, really. And they were wonderful, and they had a lot of great suggestions, but it just didn't feel right for me at the time. And so I said
Mhm.
no. But at the time, I had like several full manuscripts out to agents, and I was like, "Oh, no worries, something else will work out." And then it was like
Right.
maybe like a year and a half more before I got my publisher. So there were definitely times in that quiet period where I was like, "Oh gosh, did I make a mistake?" But in the end, I'm really glad that I kept the story in the direction I wanted it.
Yeah, I admire that so much that you were so concrete on what you wanted your story to be and stuck to that. Because I
Yeah, I
think
feel like it's hard to
sometimes
know.
that's hard.
Yeah, and I feel like it's hard to know too, like, okay, what am I being overly precious about, and what do I need to just kind of recognize isn't working, and what is really the heart of the story that I want to hang on to. And I do feel like it's tough to figure that out, but one thing that helped me was when I was in like a year and a half of hearing basically crickets after saying no, I didn't, to that editor. I would go back occasionally and be like, okay, if I could do it again, if she showed up in my inbox again and said, hey, we still want your story, would I make those changes? And I always came back to, no, I still wouldn't make them. Even if this book doesn't get published, this isn't the right direction. So for me, that was an affirmation of, okay, this was more than just me being, too precious over my own words. And it was really about
Mhm.
the story that I was trying to tell.
Mhm. I'm so glad that it found a publisher.
Thanks, me too.
How did you know, like once you sent it to readers, how did you know it was done? I'm asking because I never know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like at some point you have to just say, okay, I'm going to see where I can go with this. And because I mean, I could probably go back to it now. I've looked at it, a gajillion times by now. And I actually just recently sent my final proof edits off to the publisher, and I could probably still go read through it now and find something to change and find something to tinker with. And I think that a lot of people are like that. You can always revise yourself. So I think at some point you just have to decide, okay, this is as best as I can make it for now, and kind of see what happens. At least that's what I had to do. I had to say, okay, if I don't stop, I'm going to just tinker with this forever, and it'll never see the light of day because it'll just be me tapping on it forever.
Right. Yeah. Did you ever kind of have moments of like self-doubt during that year and a half of crickets where you were like thinking of changing it? Maybe not necessarily a complete genre switch.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I had a couple, like I said, I had a couple of other close calls with agents who were just, I really kind of got in my head a little bit because it is a dual POV story. And I had several agents who they were like, oh, well, dual POV is really tough to sell. You have to be really
Mm-hmm.
invested. And so not interested for that reason. And I definitely had some times where I thought, oh no, should I rewrite this from just one perspective? Would that
Mm-hmm.
make it more commercial, more successful? Um, so I definitely I think every writer does, you have all of those things. You're like, well, what if I did this? Well, what if I did that? And I don't have a good solution for for
No.
not feeling that besides just, again, like I said, if go back to yourself and say, okay, if I changed this, would I still be happy with the story? And if the answer is no, then probably it's not worth the change.
Right. So you're working on something new now?
I am, yes, I am. I'm working on a new manuscript, editing it. It is single POV, not because I felt like I had to, but that's just what the story ended up being. And so yeah, I'm sort of towards a later stages of editing. I've gotten feedback from readers, and I'm incorporating that, and I'm hoping to see what happens with it in not too long.
Are you going to query again, or do you think you'll go directly to small presses?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk to my current publisher, and then once we have that conversation, then I'll kind of decide what I'm going to do from there. But since I'm still getting the first book out, we haven't gotten to that point to for them to read the new manuscript yet.
And your current one that's coming out, it's called Somewhere Past the End.
Yes, Somewhere Past the End. It is about a girl who is a young woman who's trying to leave this cult that she's been raised in. And once she kind of has all her ducks in a row to leave, a lot of the members of the cult disappear in sort of mysterious circumstances. And that kind of
Mhm.
throws her off her prepared path, and she has to kind of figure out what to do next.
It is such a strong place to start the book. Um yeah, I was like, "What is happening?" Did it always start in the same place, or did this beginning come through revisions?
It always started in the same place. I actually wrote a short story first to kind of see, did I feel like it had legs to kind of go into a novel, or was it just a short idea? So I wrote a short story first, and that's where the short story started as well. And when I decided, yes, I wanted to turn it into a novel, I just kept going.
Is your second book, does it deal with similar themes?
Yeah, there's no cult. So sorry to disappoint for those who are looking for another cult book.
There are many cult enthusiasts.
But it does deal with similar themes of grief and motherhood, and trying to sort of find your place in the world in a way when you feel like you're not sure where it is at the time. So it definitely still deals with those themes, but no cult this go round.
Did you ever consider self-publishing? Or did you
I
always know you wanted to go traditional?
I did not consider self-publishing, only because I even even as a small press author, which still requires a lot of your own marketing, I'm not good at that either. And so I knew I'm just, that's not my strong suit, is marketing and putting myself out there. I struggle with it a lot. So, and I knew that self-publishing was a whole mountain to climb in that regard, and how much work self-published authors put into getting their work out there and marketing themselves. And I just thought, I don't know if I'm cut out for that, because I already struggle with it. So I decided I'm not going to go down that route, only because I know from seeing others do it how much work and how much time and commitment it takes. And I just didn't, my brain, I don't think, is really wired super well to do the marketing side of things.
Right. It's a tricky, like, it's definitely, I think, different skills. And sometimes it messes with my head too, a little bit of like the romantic notion of being a writer, which is so
Right.
lovely. And if in a perfect world, if I was going to be a writer, I would be the romantic notion of a writer instead of like all these numbers and platforms and like
Right.
um newsletters and all the things that go into it now. It's kind of a different career than I think it was in the past.
Yeah, I think so too. And yeah, I think no matter what route you take as an author, you still have to come up against that. Even if you have a huge publisher, there's still an expectation these days that you're going to do a lot of your own marketing and social media and that kind of thing. And I think that's where it's tough to separate sort of the act of writing from the business of writing. And
Mhm.
especially when you're putting a book out or self-publishing, they kind of get all mishmashed, and you feel like, wait, I thought I liked writing, but I really am not having fun right now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Although sometimes that happens during the actual writing process
Yeah, that's
too.
true. That's true. What is There's that famous quote that's like, I like having written.
It does feel good. It's like running a lot. Like,
Right.
I don't know if you're a runner at all, but I love when I have ran.
Right.
It feels great after it's all
Right.
done. And there's moments during too where I'm like, this isn't so bad. This is great. But
Right.
most of the time it's like, when is this done? It's been like 0.2 miles.
Yeah,
Come on.
definitely.
Have you ever felt stuck in your writing?
Yeah, definitely. As I mentioned, I was querying for a long time. And of course, the advice you'll hear when you're querying from everywhere is work on your next project when you're querying, so you don't get so down in the weeds about whatever project you're querying. And I had a really hard time with that for probably the first full year I was querying. Definitely the first 6 months. I would sit down and try to write, and I just couldn't get words on the page because I was thinking about, well, maybe that editor's going to email me back, or, oh, I just got an email. I heard the ding. Maybe I should go check it before I keep going. Or, well, they didn't like this. And what if I'm just writing the same thing again, basically? So
Right.
I definitely felt really stuck in that time. But for me, and I think for a lot of people, if you are a writer, eventually you have ideas that are just like too noisy in your head, and you have to get them down on paper. And so I think for me, that was what eventually kind of got me unstuck, was just like I kept having this little idea in my head, and I thought, well, goodness, either querying is going to drive me crazy, or the fact that I can't get this idea out of my head is. So I need to do something about one of them.
Right? Yeah. Where do you get your inspiration from?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think all over. This story, for Somewhere Past the End, I'd always been kind of interested in cults, and sort of the psychology of how someone can get pulled in and then decide they don't want to be there anymore. And
Mhm.
the book I'm writing now was just a lot of little things, really. Somebody, I had an experience with a coworker a long time ago, where one of their siblings had passed away and they were an organ donor, and her family ended up meeting the woman who received their sibling's heart and kind of
Oh, wow.
striking up a friendship. And so that was like some of the inspiration for the book I'm working on currently. But I was sitting in the airport recently and there were these two older ladies behind me chit chatting. And I was like, oh, that's so, their lives sound so interesting. And, trying to remember little tidbits. So I think you can
Hmm.
really get inspiration from anywhere. You never know when it's going to show up.
Yeah, it's so true. Do you like to write in coffee shops to kind of like get in on that? Are you a home writer? Where do you like to write?
I'm definitely a home writer. I don't really like to have a lot of when I'm actually writing. I mean, I love to be sitting in a coffee shop and, kind of picking up on random little snatches of conversation. But when I'm actually writing, I like to have no noise pretty much. So I usually do most of my writing at home.
Yeah, same. Also, I have a youngin, so it's
Yes.
easier to be home and hopefully
Yes.
she's
I have a
still
4-year
asleep
old.
in the morning. Ah, mine's 4.5.
Oh, okay. I do a lot of writing early in the morning because that's when the house is quiet.
Same. Daylight savings time
Mm.
recently has been like a double-edged sword a little bit because everybody's sleep schedule has been very wonky, but she's been sleeping in a
Oh,
little
great.
bit. I know. So I'm like, oh, a little bit more writing time.
Definitely. Yeah. I always have those days where my son will sleep in a little bit for a few days in a row, and I'll be like, oh, this is great. I'm just going to keep writing. And then, of course, it all comes crashing down because then he's up
Yeah,
at, 6:30 the next morning.
totally. Yeah, every time it happens that she sleeps in, I'm like, we've turned the corner. This is what
Right.
they talk about. This is what they all talk about. Like they just sleep in and they get up at 9 and it never stays.
I do have an 11-year-old who does sleep in till 9. So
Oh,
at least
yeah?
coming down the horizon, there's that.
So eventually there is a corner that gets
Right.
turned.
Uh,
Yeah, well, more writing time then, I guess.
yes.
Do you ever write at night or are you strictly a morning writer?
I mean, I have written at night. It's not my preferred writing time because I feel like my brain is already sort of shutting down by the time it gets dark outside.
Mhm.
But when I was working on my first draft of this book, I did do a lot of writing at night, just to try to get a draft done and get a draft down on the page. But I prefer the morning.
Mhm. How long did it take you to draft? Are you a fast writer or more slow, take it as you go?
I think I'm a medium speed drafter. I would say several months it took me to get the first draft down, but then I just because like I said before, I just kind of word vomit onto the page the first draft. So
Mhm.
the drafting process isn't that long, but then there's a lot longer of revision time.
Totally. Yes. I have the same situation.
And I don't know, I think everyone's different, but I just prefer it that way. I'd rather make sure I get all my thoughts down on the page and don't miss something. I can always go back and
Mhm.
cut stuff out when I'm like, "Oh, that sounded great in my head and it's gibberish now." I can always cut that, but
Yeah. I have found that I have tried outlining projects, and I have found when I outline, I either lose interest in the project because I already wrote it pretty
right.
much, or I completely change it where the outline did me no good because I changed everything about it.
Yes. I've also had
um,
that experience.
yeah, so I don't know if it's my brain just needs the novelty of
Right.
drafting to get the first draft out. It's just such a daunting task at first.
For sure, yes. I feel similarly. Like, I do think that novelty helps. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen, let's find out.
Right? Because then you can just keep writing towards those little markers to see what comes up. I do I do find it does make a lot of revisions for me.
Yes, me too. And
Yeah,
there's things
some
that you thought you were going directions you thought you were going in the beginning, and then you change halfway through, so then when you have to go back to the beginning and be like, "Oh, well, that's not leading there anymore, so I need to to reroute
yeah.
that subplot."
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, right now, I've been spiraling a little bit
Oh
because,
no.
like, well, I just do. Um, it's fine. uh, but like, there's so many revisions, right? And there's
Mhm.
so many places you can take a novel. For you, who are also a fellow pantser who had many different drafts, how did you find kind of the root of your story? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like where you wanted it to go. Like I just admire so much that you were like, this is my story and you weren't going to change it for this big person editor. And so there's a very big part of me that's like, I want to know how to do that.
I mean, honestly, I don't think I found really the heart of the story until I was done with the draft, until I had the whole story written, and then I could look back and be like, "Oh, right, that this is where I was going the whole time. This is where I wanted to get." And having that realization, then I could go back into earlier parts of the book and kind of zhuzh up those spots to make them, fit more with where I ended up going in the end.
Hmm.
But I really, and the same thing with the book I'm working on now, I felt like I needed to write the whole thing before I really knew what was at the heart of the story. And I'm editing a second one, and I started drafting a third manuscript, and I always feel the same way at the beginning of a manuscript, like, I don't know. I have no idea where this is going. I don't know what this is about. This is stupid. Why did I even start this? I always feel that way every time. And then at the end of it, I can see that's where I was going. That's what I was trying to say. And then you can always, sculpt a little bit in the earlier parts to highlight what you were trying to say. But for me, I have
Hmm.
to write a whole draft before I have any idea what's at the heart of the story.
And then at the end of the first draft, you're like pretty sure, like once you've gotten there where
Yeah,
you need
I think
to.
once I've gotten to the end of the story, I can kind of look back at it. And once I do that second read through, I can see, like, oh, this is where I was going. And you can see little glimmers of what you were trying to say when you didn't know you were trying to say it. And then you can,
Isn't that fascinating how that
yeah,
happens? You're like, my brain knew something.
right. Or I don't know if you've had that experience where you're doing a revision and you're like, oh, I should really say this. And then two sentences later, you read it. You're
I
like, oh, I didn't
have.
say it.
I have. I'll even like, cause I'll put it on my Kindle, right? And then read through it the
Right.
first time and I'll write notes and I'll be like, oh, I need to add this thing here. And then it will be like 2 or 3 lines later. I'm like, oh, I did.
Right. Your brain knew.
Somehow. It's so crazy.
It is.
It's kind of a little bit mystical.
Definitely.
So how did you kind of learn your writing process?
Oh, that's a good question. I think just a lot of trial and error, like most people, I am not somebody who enjoys getting up early, even though that is when I do most of my writing now. And just going back to toddler and preschool sleep schedules, my 4-year-old has never been a good sleeper. And so when he was really little, I just mostly had to write on nap times and things because I wasn't getting any sleep. I wasn't getting enough sleep to get up at 5 in the morning to write. I was usually already awake with him and not writing. So I think just as each sort of season of life has shifted a little, like, okay, the baby's finally sleeping through the night. My older child is good with sleep. I've been able to refine that and say, like, okay, getting up early is what's going to work in this time. So I really think, like, whatever the external factors in your life are, you can kind of adapt that a little bit to your writing process. But I like to be, now at least, I like to be up early where I can think when it's quiet and there's no other noise and my brain hasn't started to shut down yet.
Hmm. Your writing on a line level is so stunning.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
I was blown away. How did you learn that? Did you
Oh
take
gosh.
classes or craft books, or did you just learn by reading?
I think a lot of learning by reading. I didn't do an MFA, but I do have a master's in literature. So I
Hmm.
with the plan to teach, that was sort of my plan in going into my MA. So I didn't, I just had to read so many good writers, for an MA in literature. It's just constant. I mean, I took a class once where we were reading like 2 books a week and writing a paper every week on those 2 books. So I think a lot of it was just tons of reading. I didn't take a ton of creative writing classes. Like I said, I didn't do an MFA. I just was doing a lot of like literature analysis.
Hmm.
And so I think, but I think you can kind of get some similar effects, if you're practicing the writing, or if you're writing about someone else's writing, some of those things kind of sink into your brain. And then also, yeah, I've read a ton of craft books because, I think you can feel imposter syndrome about anything. But when I started querying and I started seeing all these other very talented writers that all had MFAs, I was like, oh gosh, I don't have an MFA. Like, what am I doing? So there have been a lot of craft books and a lot of books on writing that I've read, just trying to shore up sort of that side.
Right. Were there any that stood out or were particularly helpful?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much going to tell you how to write on, a sentence level, but I think Stephen King's book on writing is so good. I have read it several times and I always come back to it. I'm not even a super big Stephen King. I'm not a big horror fan. I'm too much of a fraidy cat for that. So I'm not even like a huge Stephen King reader just because I'm a scaredy cat. But his writing book, I just thought it was so conversational and so open about his writing process, and very much just like, this is what I do and this is what worked for me, and not so prescriptive as some tend to be.
Hmm.
I love that one. That's one I always come back to a lot.
Hmm. Were there any books, like fiction, literature that you read that was particularly inspiring to you?
Yeah, I love Lauren Groff. She's always sort of like a pie in the sky, like that's what I would like, how I would like to write one day. So I thought her most recent book, The Vaster Wilds, was just astonishing. I couldn't stop talking about it when I read it. And just sort of that really granular detail. And if somebody can write a book that's largely about a character who's alone in the woods for the majority of the book and still have you riveted, I feel like that's something worth emulating.
Hmm.
Yes, I love Anne Patchett too. I think she's really just really talented at writing just human characters who you can imagine being in the real world. You can imagine like running into a coffee shop and having a conversation with. Um, and I think that's also a big challenge, is writing characters that feel real. And so I really admire her ability to do that. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are two of my big ones, two of my favorites. There's so many. I just in a pure love of the story, I read Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders not too long ago, and I was just absolutely blown away by that. Just how unique and kind of weird, but also riveting it was, with so many different voices, but still it feels like a narrative that pulls all the way through. Um, so yeah, those are some of my favorites recently, I'd say.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, how has it been kind of like getting ready for your debut to come out? Because it comes out May
20th.
20th?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a whirlwind because it's so interesting. This is my first book, obviously, and it's just all new, trying to promote it and trying to get reviews and trying to get it to ARC readers and figuring out, all the things that go along with it. And it's a lot more talking about myself than I'm always comfortable doing. So it's definitely been a whirlwind, but I'm in a group called the Debutante Ball, which is a group for women who are putting out their first book, in that calendar year. And that's been just such a wonderful resource because everybody's going through the same thing. Everybody's putting their first book out, and we meet monthly and we have a chat on Discord. And so we can just say like, oh my gosh, this crazy thing happened. Is anyone else going through this? Or I'm so upset about blah, blah, blah. And we have 7 of us who all understand and are going through something similar and can relate. So that's been really helpful.
Yeah. It's a supportive community, I think, is so important,
Definitely.
especially like ones going through the same thing. And you have a launch party coming up, don't you?
I do, yes, yes. At All Good Books in Columbia, South Carolina, where I live. It's on the
So
20th,
exciting.
the launch day at 6. So, yeah, I'm really excited about that. Of course, that's another nerve-wracking thing, like reaching out to bookstores and saying, hey, could I do something at your store?
Yeah. So did you reach out to them?
I did, yes, I did, yeah, and they were gracious and kind enough to say yes, so I'm looking forward
Nice.
to that. I just moved to Columbia in August, so that's been another element of this whole launch is that I left, like, a community where I knew pretty much everyone and came somewhere new, so trying to find connections and make those connections in a new place while also saying, "Hey, read my book," is, has been a lot.
That is a lot. That's a lot of new things at once and a lot of kind of terrifying things at once.
Yes, definitely.
Well, that's great that I think, I mean, I've never been to the bookstore, but I already knew about it when I was like, "Oh, what's she doing?" And I was like, "Oh, yay. That's a great bookstore. They have a lot of really cool events that I wish I lived closer to go to."
They do have a lot of great things. I'm actually going to one this week. So yeah, they always have something terrific going on.
That's very exciting. And you're editing a second book and you're starting to draft a third book?
Yeah, I started to draft a third book while I was waiting for some feedback for some readers on the second
Mm.
one, and
Mhm.
so I got about 25 pages written on that, and then when I got all the feedback from my second manuscript, I sort of put that on pause, and I'm not one of those people who can work on two things at a time. I can just only do one at a time, so
Yeah, I thought I was one of those people.
yeah,
I'm not. Like,
right,
'cause my brain, it like won't focus then because I
right,
could be
yeah,
doing either, right? So
yeah,
then how like it melts my brain is what it turns
yes.
out. So I feel like for me, um, I just have to pick one and focus. And then like you do, like if you're waiting on feedback,
Right.
you can kind of play with something. But sometimes that gets me into trouble.
Yes, I get that.
Was it hard to set aside the one you were working on to go back to the second one?
Um, it wasn't because I'd written myself into a spot where I wasn't sure what was going to happen next.
Yeah. So then
So
it
I
was
was
a
like,
little bit
oh,
of a relief.
this is a great time to stop and set this aside, and I'll come back to it with, I'm sure, much better ideas.
My brain will have figured it out without me.
Yes, definitely. I'll just look
Oh,
at the
thank
page and
goodness.
know.
I always wish that would happen.
Yeah,
But it is funny how like solutions come to you randomly.
that's true. Yeah,
Um it's hard to wait on them though.
right. Yeah. I do find that sometimes if I'm having trouble with like a plot or something, that cleaning the house can be a really good way to
Mm,
just, the mindless activity of like mopping or dusting can help your brain generate some ideas.
totally. Absolutely. Agatha Christie she has a famous quote that the best time to plot a novel is while you're doing the dishes.
Oh, that's great. I haven't heard that one before, but
Yeah,
that's exactly how I
I
feel.
have a notebook with it printed on there because I'm like, yes, it's true because it's such a mindless, kind of monotonous task, but it's
Yeah.
also kind of soothing because there's bubbles and nice smells, sometimes not so nice smells, but like the soap.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I always get ideas too, like while driving.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
driving kind of a long ways.
Mm-hmm. That's another good. Your brain can, yeah, because your one part of your brain can do all the focus on driving, and the rest of your brain can kind of be freed up a little, for sure.
Yeah, it's just crazy how we think of all these stories. None of it makes any sense.
Yeah, I know. And I also find sometimes if I'm stuck on a longer project, I do still like to dabble in writing short stories, or I like doing flash a lot because it feels a lot more like in a more immediate of a payoff than writing something long like a novel. If you write something in, 900 words, you're like, oh, it's done.
So, is that like flash fiction? Like, is that how
Yes.
you do it? Is you give yourself a word count?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on different places. Will categorize it differently. So, but I think a bigger definition is anything under 1,000 words. So that's
Mm-hmm.
usually what, if I'm going to sit down and write something that's flash, that's usually kind of in the back of my mind. The word count to shoot for is under 1,000 words.
I've written short, like more like nonfiction essays, but I've never written a short fiction story, and I've always been interested, but it sounds almost more daunting to me than a novel. It does sound more daunting to me than a novel, even though it's shorter. Like, how do you, maybe it's because I don't know enough about it, but like, how do you fit your whole story kind of arc
Right.
in such a small amount of words?
I'm no expert at it by any means. I'm very much a dabbler, so there are other folks who would, can give you much more expertise than I can. But I do remember in 8th grade, I think it was, in an English class, I had a teacher, and our challenge was to write a 50-word short story.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I'm an overwriter always. So my first draft of that story was 300 words. And then we had to cut it down to 50. But I just remember it being such an impactful exercise to try to really think about what is the most essential element of the story here. What is the one tiny thing that I'm trying to communicate with this story, and what can I cut out to just reveal that? So that's kind of the approach I take when I'm writing. I always start with a draft that's over 1,000 words and then have to like whittle it down. But I feel like it's a good practice for novel writing too, because when you go back to your revisions, you can do the same thing. Like, what is the
Hmm.
essential thing I'm trying to show here, or what's the essential plot point that needs to be revealed by the end of this chapter, and where is this all just extraneous information that I can cut?
Hmm. I bet it makes you better at writing log lines too.
I don't know about that. I feel like I'm pretty terrible at that.
Oh, me too.
Especially when you don't have like I tend to write stories that are like slightly more on the quieter side. So I feel like that
Hmm.
makes it harder too to like find a snappy like one liner for for something.
Right. Yeah. Although the start of your book is not quiet.
Yeah, that one has a little bit more propulsion in the beginning, but I actually, that was some of the feedback I just got on my second story, was like, it really gets going at this point, but all the stuff
Right.
before, I was like waiting for something to happen. I was like, oh, I know, that's kind of my Achilles heel.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so tricky to, especially like I'm as a person in my reading, I enjoy quiet stories and I
Hmm.
enjoy vibes. And I enjoy stories where it does take a little bit to kind of
Hmm.
get into it. Um, but I think that those stories are much harder to sell now, or maybe that's just the line of thought about it, because that's what I always hear. And so my friends always say like, oh, like I got feedback that my story is just too quiet for the marketplace. But I think that that is, I don't know. So it makes me sad. Like, I hope we don't lose quiet stories because there's value to them.
I think so too. I do feel like every now and then I get like a little ray of hope. Like, I just read Orbital by Samantha
Oh, I
Harvey.
haven't read that. I've heard it's good.
It's so good. It's so beautiful. And there's essentially not a plot at all. I mean, there's a loose plot, but it's a
I'm
lot
putting
of
it on my
just,
whole list right now.
yeah, it's really just very quiet about these astronauts and what they're thinking and what they're feeling as they're in the International Space Station. And, the people who are waiting for them back on Earth, what they're thinking about and experiencing. There's not like a real strong through line plot, but it is so gorgeously written and so beautiful, and it makes you feel all these things and think all these things, and I just loved it. And that was one of those little ray of hopes. I was like, okay, this is a pretty quiet story and it's done really well, so that makes me feel like there is still a market for quiet stories.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
It's just so tricky to navigate all of it,
Definitely.
especially like as a debut. I'm sure you came across the same thing where I think you're maybe held to different expectations than someone who's published books, which makes sense. If they have
Right.
like a proven sales, they can be have a little more leeway with their stories. But it seems for debuts, it's like bigger, bigger, more stakes, more stakes.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. And that's definitely even in the book that I have coming out, I had some of that in earlier drafts that maybe didn't like there's kind of a little bit of a ticking clock now that I didn't have in earlier drafts.
Mm-hmm.
And that came about from some feedback that was like, okay, why should we care about this?
Right.
And so even with that, even when I thought like, well, I have a pretty like things keep happening, I still got feedback that was like, not enough is happening though.
I think it's all very fascinating. And I'm so excited for your book to come out and people to read it.
Thank you. Me too.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Oh god, I hope people find the book and read it. It is going to be on NetGalley in April and May. It's not
Oh, is
online
it?
right now. Yeah, so definitely if people want an early read, they can check it out. Check it out then. But yeah, otherwise I just hope people find it and enjoy it. And yeah.
Yay. Well, I'll link all your stuff and I'm pretty sure I can link the NetGalley request thing too.
Okay, yeah. That
Yeah.
would be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really fun to chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I am so impressed with Alexandria and her courage and her just depth of knowledge of her own story, that she knew not to go with the editor, like big editor wants to publish your book, but needs these big changes done. I'm just so impressed that she was able to say no. Like, that's not my story. That's not the story I'm trying to tell. And it really made me self reflect on my stories and like, do I know my own stories well enough that that would be the case? Like, do you know your own story that you're writing well enough that you could like get to the heart of your story and say, this is it, and like not change it for a big editor at a publishing house? I don't know. It's something to think about in your writing as you go into this next week. And yeah, let me know what you think. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time. Oh, if you like this episode, please consider rating and reviewing or liking and subscribing wherever you listen to this. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. It really helps other writers find this show. So thank you very much. Bye.